This is Ethiopia's largest, busiest inland cargo terminal. Thousands of shipping containers, custom halls, warehouses, cranes working around the clock. But there's something unusual about this place. There is no ship here. In fact, there isn't even an ocean nearby. This is Modjo, Ethiopia. It sits in the Ethiopian highlands, nearly 1,800 meters above sea level, and about 550 kilometers from Djibouti in direct distance, and around 700 kilometers away by road. To reach the coast, Ethiopia's cargo has to travel all the way through another country, which is a serious problem when your country has roughly around 135 million people or zero coastline. Ethiopia is the most populous landlocked country in the world. No coast, no harbor, no direct connection to the shipping routes that move most of the world's goods. So you might assume Ethiopia doesn't have much of a shipping industry, but that's where this gets weird. Ethiopia owns ocean-going ships. It operates its own national shipping line. It moves huge volumes of cargo through terminals like this one, and it built an electrified railway stretching roughly 750 kilometers to a foreign port. So why would a landlocked country own ships? And why would it build what looks like a seaport hundreds of kilometers from the sea? To understand that, we need to rewind to 1990s when Eritrea became independent. Ethiopia lost its entire coastline almost overnight. One of Africa's largest countries was cut off from the sea. For most countries, that would have been an economic catastrophe. Ethiopia could have sold its ships, abandoned its maritime ambitions, and accepted that another country would control its access to global trade. But it didn't. It kept the ships, it built a railway across the border, it began transferring the function of a seaport into a middle of an Ethiopian highland. Ethiopia didn't bring its country closer to the ocean, it brought the port closer to the country. But that solution created another problem, because almost everything Ethiopia imports now depends on one narrow route through one neighboring country. And if that corridor suffers a prolonged disruption, Ethiopia's fuel, food, factories, and export all come under pressure. This is a story of how Ethiopia built a shipping empire without a seaport. Let's investigate. For 4 decades, in the second half of the 20th century, Ethiopia had direct access to the Red Sea. Eritrea was federated with Ethiopia in 1952 and annexed by Ethiopian government 10 years later. Its ports at Massawa and Assab became Ethiopia's principal maritime gateways. Sitting on one of the busiest shipping lanes on earth, the corridor linking the Suez Canal to the Indian Ocean. Then something unusual happened in 1993. Eritrea, the northern coastal region that had fought a 30-year war for independence, formally became a separate country. And when the borders were redrawn, the entire coastline went with it. With Eritrea's independence, Ethiopia became one of the world's largest landlocked countries, and today is the most populous. At first, that looked manageable. The two countries stayed on good terms, and Ethiopian cargo kept flowing through Assab under a trade agreement. But in 1998, a border dispute between Ethiopia and Eritrea erupted into a full-scale war that will run for 2 years and cost tens of thousands of lives. Ethiopia's commercial use of Assab and Massawa stopped during the war, and despite the 2018 peace agreement, it has never resumed a meaningful scale. From that moment, a country of what is now around 135 million people was left overwhelmingly dependent on one practical trade corridor, the route through its small eastern neighbor Djibouti. And that route came with a huge price tag. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please like and subscribe, and drop your thoughts under the comment section on Ethiopia's attempt to build this terminal. And do you think inland port terminal is better than Ethiopia's push for access to the sea? Now back to the video. Djibouti is one of the smallest countries in Africa, home to around 1 million people. But it sits in an extraordinary position right at the entrance of the Red Sea, where shipping lanes of Asia, Europe, and the Gulf converge. Since the war with Eritrea, more than 95% of Ethiopia's foreign trade by volume has moved along the Addis Djibouti corridor. For Djibouti, this is the foundation of the entire economy. Port, logistics, and transport services form the backbone of the country. For Ethiopia, it's an enormous recurring bill. Widely cited estimates put Ethiopia total annual port and corridor-related cost at between 1.5 to 2 billion US dollars. But Djibouti's port authority dispute the way the figure is presented, arguing that actual port revenue is far lower and that much of the wider cost comes from inland transport and logistics. On the highest estimate, that would be equivalent to roughly a third of Ethiopia's projected 2025 export earnings. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said the cost is similar to building several projects the size of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is Africa's largest hydroelectric power plant. Most landlocked countries in this position simply absorb the cost. They pay the fees, accept the delays, and hand their entire trade over to foreign shipping lines and foreign ports. Ethiopia refused to do that, and the reason goes back to a decision made 6 decades ago by an emperor. In 1964, Ethiopia's last emperor, Haile Selassie, established the Ethiopian shipping lines, a national cargo carrier set up with foreign technical and commercial partners, with it the first 3 vessels built in the Netherlands. Those first 3 ships carried names from Ethiopian history: the Queen of Sheba, the Lion of Judah, and the Lalibela. They entered service in 1966 and almost immediately sailed into trouble when the Suez Canal closed in 1967 and forced them on long loss-making voyages around the Cape of Good Hope. The company survived that. It survived revolution, civil war, and the fall of empire that created it. And then in 1993, it faced something stranger. It became a national shipping line for a nation with no coast. Ethiopia is not the only landlocked country with ships. Switzerland ships from Basel on the Rhine, but maintaining a state-owned ocean-going fleet after losing every kilometer of coastline remains highly unusual. The logical move in 1993 was to sell the ships. Ethiopia kept them and simply moved the fleet operating base across the border to the port of Djibouti. Today, the company operates as Ethiopian Shipping and Logistics. It runs a fleet of about 11 ocean-going ships, including general cargo, multipurpose, bulk and tanker vessels. It also charters additional ships when needed, with routes connecting the Red Sea, the Gulf, the Mediterranean, and the Far East. It is now owned by Ethiopian Investment Holdings, the country's sovereign wealth fund. For the Ethiopian fiscal year ending in 2024, the company reported revenue of about $1 billion. Owning ships gave Ethiopia control over the sea leg of its trade, but the real bottleneck was never on the water. It was on the land, in the custom queues, the truck parks, and the border crossings, and fixing that would take a far more radical piece of infrastructure. Modjo is a town in Ethiopia's Oromia region, about 75 kilometers southeast of the capital, Addis Ababa, on the main road to Djibouti. In 2009, Ethiopia opened a container terminal here, but this was more than a place to store cargo. Modjo was designed as a dry port, an inland extension of the seaport itself. Containers arriving on the coast could be moved hundreds of kilometers inland under custom controls, then cleared, processed, and released here. Storage, customs, documentation, final cargo release, all of it could not happen at Modjo, far from the sea but still directly connected to it. The state created a dedicated dry port services enterprise to build the network and brought in Dutch port consultants to write Modjo's master plan, because if you are going to build a port with no sea, you may as well learn from a country that engineered half of its lands out of one. Today, Modjo can hold more than 17,000 shipping containers at a time. Each year, the terminal can handle more than 136,000 containers, and according to Ethiopian Shipping and Logistics, more than 3/4 of Ethiopia's import passed through Modjo, and Modjo was only the beginning. Semera followed in 2010 in Ethiopia's Afar region, just 270 kilometers from Djibouti, with a focus on vehicle imports. Then came Dire, Dawa, and Kombolcha in 2013, followed by Kaleti inside Addis Ababa in 2014. Over time, Ethiopian Shipping and Logistics expanded the network to as many as 9 dry port locations across the country. Not all of them have operated as full-scale container terminal at the same time, but together they do something important. They move customs, paperwork, and cargo handling away from the coast and much closer to the factories, businesses, and markets that actually need the goods. The result was a much more distributed national cargo system. Djibouti still provided the access to the sea, but much of the storage, customs, clearance, and cargo processing could now happen inside Ethiopia instead. That reduced Ethiopia's dependence on handling everything at the coast. But one major problem remained. Most containers traveling from Djibouti to Modjo still had to cover roughly 700 kilometers by road on the back of a truck. Ethiopia had once been connected to Djibouti by rail. A French-built meter gauge railway completed in 1917. By the 2000s, that rail had largely fallen apart, so almost all of Ethiopia's imports were moving by road, much of it along a 2-lane highway. The journey itself could take days and add congestion, border checks, and delays, and cargo could spend much longer traveling from ship to the shelves. So Ethiopia and Djibouti built a replacement, a 752-kilometer standard gauge railway from Addis Ababa to the port of Djibouti, fully electrified end-to-end. Major construction began in 2012. The line was ceremonially inaugurated in 2016, and full commercial operations began in January 2018. The total corridor cost is commonly reported at around $4 billion. Ethiopian section costs approximately $3.4 billion, with about 70% of that financed by China's Export-Import Bank. The line was built by 2 Chinese state contractors, China Railway Group and the China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation, and became the first cross-border electrified railway in Africa. Freight was always the railway's main economic purpose, although it also carried passengers. The line runs past industrial parks and connects Djibouti's port with major logistic hubs inside Ethiopia, including Modjo. Cargo that once spent days traveling by road can now cross the main border in around 12 hours by rail before customs, loading, and final truck journey. Instead of long convoys of trucks, hundreds of containers can move together on a single train. The early years were difficult. Traffic grew slowly, power supply was unreliable, and the railway operated at a loss under Chinese management. Then in 2024, control was handed over to joint Ethio-Djibouti Railway Company. Later that year, the company reported its first profitable quarter. Freight volumes have grown sharply since the railway's early years, although the line still carries less cargo than it was originally designed for. At the Djibouti end, the ports are building rail lines that go directly to where the ships dock, allowing containers to be moved straight from ship to train. Ships, a dry port, a railway. On their own, they are just pieces of infrastructure. What made Ethiopia different was the decision to connect them into a single system. It solved the problems that had held the country's economy back for decades. But there was still one thing this entire network could not do. That would become Ethiopia's next challenge. In the early 2010s, the Ethiopian government brought a shipping, maritime, dry port, and logistic operation under one state company, Ethiopian Shipping and Logistics. Then in 2012, it introduced a multimodal transport system. Under this system, An importer can use one contract with one operator to move a container from overseas port all the way to a dry port inside Ethiopia. The ship, port handling, railway and truck journey are all coordinated under one transport agreement, while the custom clearance is still handled by the government. The system was controversial. For years, the state company controlled most multimodal imports, and the private freight companies strongly opposed that agreement. By the late 2010s, the government began opening the sector to more competition, but the basic idea remained the same. The faster cargo moves inland, the less time is spent sitting in expensive storage at the coast. And Ethiopia, a country that once depended almost entirely on someone else's port, now controls most of the journey itself. The ships, the railway, the dry port, the logistics, almost everything except access to the sea. But if the system works this well, why is Ethiopia searching so urgently for more secure access to the sea? Nearly 95% of Ethiopia's trade still passes through a single foreign corridor. That means the entire economy still depends on one route, no matter how efficient the logistics systems behind it becomes. And for the past decade, Ethiopia has been quietly searching the map for other ways to reach the sea. To the east lies Berbera, a deep water port in Somaliland, a self-governing territory that declared independence from Somalia in 1991. Berbera has been expanded significantly by Dubai-based port operator DP World. Today, it serves an alternative gateway for some Ethiopian cargo, although it still handles far less trade than the Djibouti corridor. In January 2024, Ethiopia signed a controversial memorandum of understanding with Somaliland. Ethiopia and Somaliland officials said the deal could give Ethiopia commercial maritime access and access for its navy under a long-term arrangement. Somalia, which considers Somaliland part of its territory, rejected the agreement, calling it a violation of its sovereignty. Later that year, Turkey helped broker the Ankara Declaration. Ethiopia and Somalia reaffirmed Somalia's sovereignty and agreed to continue negotiations on commercial agreements that could give Ethiopia more reliable access to the sea under Somalia's authority. The agreement helped ease tension, but it did not give Ethiopia a port, and it did not resolve the dispute over Somaliland. To the south is Kenya's new port at Lamu, the centerpiece of the Lapset Corridor, a major transport project designed to connect Kenya, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. Ethiopia is one of the main markets the corridor is meant to serve, and it has previously discussed securing dedicated access at the port. Then there is the most sensitive option of all, Assab, the Eritrean port Ethiopia lost access to decades ago. Today, Assab has once again become part of much more tense conversation between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Whether through an agreement with Somalia, greater access to Berbera or Lamu, or a future deal with Eritrea, Ethiopia is still looking for more ways to reach the sea. But one important thing has already changed. Much of the system inside Ethiopia is already in place. The ships are operating, the railway is running, the major dry ports are handling cargo, and over time, that network can be extended toward new trade routes. The difficult part is what comes next. Every new route to the coast will still require political agreement, cross-border cooperation, and billions of dollars in infrastructure. Ethiopia is set out to solve a problem it could never change: geography. It could not move the sea closer, so it built almost everything a seaport needs: the terminal, the customs systems, the cranes, the ships, and the railway connecting them. Everything except the water. More than 60 years after Emperor Haile Selassie ordered ships for a country that still had its coastline owned, Ethiopia has built one of the most integrated logistics systems in the region. If you love Divinity Africa infrastructure project like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comment section what you think about what Ethiopia has achieved so far. See you on the next one.